cut it down, right now, before he gets back. Vivian Crowley stood beside our pearl-white Range Rover, one hand on her hip and the other pointing at the oldest black walnut tree on my property, like she was ordering somebody to pull a dead shrub. The young man holding the chainsaw looked toward my house, saw my 13-year-old daughter filming through the kitchen window, and hesitated. But Vivian snapped her fingers and said, "This land belongs to Cedar Hollow now. My name is Grant Mercer, and for 24 years I've worked as a licensed boundary surveyor in the hill country outside Fredericksburg, Texas, which means I make my living settling the kinds of arguments most people start after 2 beers and a glance at an old fence. I know monuments, bearings, deed calls, creek boundaries, forgotten rights of way, and the strange little mistakes that can sleep inside courthouse records for generations before waking up and costing somebody a fortune. The land Vivian was standing on had belonged to my family since 1939. 16 rough acres of limestone, live oak, cedar, and black walnut pressed against the western side of a new subdivision called Cedar Hollow Preserve. My grandfather raised goats there, my father repaired tractors there, and my wife, Rebecca, planted wildflowers along the south pasture until cancer took her 4 years ago. She left me her daughter, Sophie, 3 shelves of gardening books, and a coffee mug that said, "Measure twice, love once." I still used it every morning even though the handle had been glued back on twice. The day after Rebecca's funeral, Sophie and I walked out to the walnut grove, and I told her something I probably needed to hear more than she did. "This place stays with us," I said. "People can take money, jobs, even years from you, but they do not get this land." Sophie looked up at me with Rebecca's gray eyes and asked, "What if they try?" I told her, "Then they learn why your dad keeps every piece of paper." At the time, Cedar Hollow was nothing but survey stakes, bulldozer tracks, and glossy signs showing smiling families who had apparently never owned trash cans. 2 years later, it was 160 nearly identical houses arranged around a pool, a clubhouse, and enough decorative stonework to rebuild a small Roman village. Vivian Crowley became the first HOA president, which surprised nobody because Vivian had the rare ability to turn a bake sale into a military occupation. She sold luxury homes, wore cream-colored jackets in 100-degree weather, and smiled without ever giving the impression that she was happy. The first time she came to my porch, she carried a leather folder and called me Mr. Mercer 6 times in 4 minutes. "We would like to establish a temporary maintenance lane," she said, tapping a map with one manicured finger, "just along your east boundary, for landscaping equipment and seasonal storage." "No," I said. She blinked as if I had answered in another language. Perhaps I was unclear. "It would benefit the entire community." "You were clear. The answer is still no." Her smile stayed in place, but something behind it hardened. "Our attorney believes Cedar Hollow already has access rights." I leaned over the map. The line she was pointing at ran 20 feet inside my deeded boundary. "Your attorney is welcome to send me the recording information. He will." "Good." I walked her back to the gate, and before getting into her SUV, she turned and said, "You may want to think carefully about being the difficult neighbor before this community is fully established." I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "You may want to think carefully before threatening a surveyor about a property line." She drove off fast enough to throw dust over my mailbox. That night, I pulled every deed, plat, field note, and tax map connected to the property. There was no maintenance easement, no access agreement, no license, nothing that gave Cedar Hollow the right to cross even 1 inch of my land. 11 days later, I came home from a boundary job near Kerrville and found a 36-foot maintenance trailer parked across my gravel turnaround. Cedar Hollow Preserve was painted on the side in dark green letters, and its rear wheel sat directly over the root flare of a walnut tree my father had grafted when I was 8. A note was tucked beneath my windshield wiper. "Temporary community use through November. Thank you for your cooperation. Vivian Crowley, HOA President." Sophie came outside carrying 2 glasses of lemonade, took one look at the trailer, and slowly set them on the porch rail. "Did you say yes?" she asked. "No." "Did she ask again?" "No." "So she just put it here. Looks that way." Sophie folded her arms. "Mom would have moved it with the tractor." That was true. Rebecca had been 5'4" and believed tow chains solved most diplomatic problems. I looked at the trailer, felt my jaw tighten, then forced myself to breathe. "Your mother also once pulled the door off our chicken coop," I said. We are going to try paperwork first. I photographed everything. The trailer, the tire, the damaged root, the license plate, the ruts, the note, and the distance from the recorded boundary monument. I logged the time, saved the GPS coordinates, backed the files up in 3 places, then called my attorney, Arthur Bell. Arthur was 73, wore suspenders year-round, and had the soothing voice of a man who had billed people for bad decisions since the Nixon administration. "She put a trailer on your land after you denied permission?" he asked. "Yes." "Did she leave a note?" "Signed it." There was a pause, followed by a quiet chuckle. "I do appreciate organized arrogance." The next morning, I sent a certified trespass notice giving the HOA 7 days to remove the trailer. I included my professional seal, the parcel number, photographs, and a storage rate of $65 per hour beginning after the deadline. I copied Vivian, every board member, the HOA management company, their attorney, and the county code office. Then I posted 8 large signs along the boundary. Private property, no commercial storage, written permission required. Sophie helped me set the posts, holding the level while I drove them into the hard Texas ground. On the last sign, she drew a tiny walnut in the corner with a permanent marker. Vivian responded 2 days later by sending 2 more trailers. One carried lawn equipment, the other folding tables and pool furniture. The driver slapped an HOA inventory sticker on my fence while I stood 10 feet away. "That fence belongs to me," I said. He shrugged. "Mrs. Something's Mal." Crowley said, "This is association land." "Does she show you a deed?" "She signs my checks." That was not my question. He avoided my eyes and drove away. I photographed the sticker and started 3 separate billing clocks. That Saturday, Sophie and I attended a neighborhood barbecue because the original development agreement allowed adjacent legacy landowners to use the community facilities. Vivian was standing near the pool beneath a canvas umbrella, surrounded by her board members and holding a glass of pink wine. She raised her voice the moment she saw me. "Grant, I received your adorable invoice. A few people laughed because they thought they were supposed to." "Glad it arrived," I said. "My attorney says you are confused about the easement. Then your attorney should record it before your trailers cost you more than your clubhouse." Her expression tightened. "This is not your father's pasture anymore." Sophie's hand slipped into mine. I could feel how hard she was gripping. I smiled at Vivian, though it took some effort. "That is the interesting thing about land," I said. "It does not care what you call it." We left before I said anything less useful. 6 days later, while I was working near Llano, Sophie called me at 9:18 in the morning. She was whispering, but behind her, I could hear chainsaws. "Dad, there are men by the walnut grove." "Which trees?" She started crying. "The old ones, and an HOA lady is telling them where to cut." I told her to go inside, lock every door, and film from the window. Then I drove home faster than I had driven since the night Rebecca went to the emergency room. And when I came over the last rise, I saw the crown of my grandfather's walnut tree tilt against the sky, hang there for 1 terrible second, and fall. By the time I reached the grove, both trees were down. The old one my grandfather planted and the younger one my father grafted from it. 2 dark trunks stretched across the grass like somebody had knocked down a pair of church columns and left them where they fell. Sawdust floated in the hot air, pale and soft, and sap ran down the fresh cuts in slow amber lines. Vivian stood beside the stumps with her leather folder tucked under one arm, giving instructions to the landscaping foreman as if she were rearranging patio furniture. Sophie was behind the kitchen glass with her phone pressed against it, crying so quietly I could barely hear her through the open window. I parked at the edge of the gravel and walked toward Vivian. I did not run. I did not shout. Anger is useful when it tells you where the wound is, but after that, it mostly gets in the way. "Who authorized this?" I asked. Vivian looked at me as if I were late to a meeting. I did. "The trees interfered with the maintenance corridor." "There is no maintenance corridor. Our standards say otherwise. Your standards do not cross my property line." She gave me that same fixed smile. "Grant, the community cannot stop functioning every time you become sentimental about an old tree." That sentence landed harder than I expected, not because of the insult, but because she had no idea what she was looking at. She saw lumber. I saw my father standing on a ladder with a grafting knife between his teeth. I saw Rebecca spreading a blanket under those branches while Sophie, still a toddler, filled her pockets with green walnuts. I saw 3 generations of hands in the bark. The young chainsaw operator stood 10 feet away, staring out the railing at his boots. He could not have been more than 20. "What is your name?" I asked him. Vivian cut in immediately. "He is an employee, and he does not need to speak to you." The young man swallowed. Luke, did anyone show you a survey before you started cutting?" He shook his head. Vivian snapped. "Do not answer that." I took out my phone. "Would you mind taking a picture of me beside the stumps, Luke? Just so nobody has to rely on memory later." His eyes moved from Vivian to the trees, then to Sophie behind the window. He took the phone and snapped 4 photographs. Vivian's face turned the color of raw beef. "You are making a very serious mistake," she said. I took my phone back. "No, Vivian, you already made it." I walked inside, and Sophie ran into me so hard I nearly lost my balance. She pressed her face against my shirt and kept saying, "I'm sorry, Dad," as though she had done something wrong. I held her until her breathing slowed. Then I made lemonade, because that is what Rebecca used to do whenever the world became too large for a child, and we sat at the kitchen table with the curtains closed. "Are they gone forever?" Sophie asked. I looked toward the grove, though I could not see it from where I sat. "Those 2 are." Her lower lip trembled. "Then they won." "No," I said. "They cut down trees. Winning is something else." That afternoon, I called an arborist named Dr. Leonard Pike, a man who had spent 30 years appraising heritage trees for insurance companies, cities, the REAS, and people going through expensive divorces over shade. He arrived the next morning with a measuring tape, a soil probe, and the grave expression of a doctor visiting a patient who had already died. He measured the trunks, photographed the root systems, counted growth rings, and studied old family photographs showing the trees at different ages. The larger walnut was 87 years old. The second was 59. Their combined appraised replacement and landscape value came to nearly $42,000. Because the cutting appeared intentional and followed written notice of trespass, Arthur believed we could seek enhanced damages. "She did not just ignore your boundary," he said in my office, turning one of the photographs beneath the lamp. "She acknowledged it, rejected it, and then destroyed property anyway." Judges do not admire that sequence. While Arthur prepared the first amended filing, I called county code enforcement about the trailers, the commercial storage, and the damaged trees. The intake officer promised an inspection within 48 hours. Nobody came. On the 3rd day, I called again and reached a woman who spoke in the cautious tone of somebody standing near an open door. "Mr. Mercer, your complaint was placed on administrative hold." "By whom?" Silence. "I need a name." Another pause. Commissioner Nolan Crowley's office contacted the department. Vivian's husband, Nolan Crowley, represented the Western Precinct, hosted charity golf tournaments, and had the soft, damp handshake of a man who never carried his own boxes. According to the officer, his staff had described my case as a private disagreement and warned the department not to waste taxpayer money. I thanked her for being honest, hung up, and filed a public records request for every email, text, calendar entry, and call log between the commissioner's office and code enforcement during the previous 60 days. Vivian thought Nolan's title could make records disappear. What she forgot was that government officials create paper every time they try to make something disappear. Meanwhile, she turned my land into a business. The HOA newsletter announced a new overflow storage program called Mercer Field Annex, offering residents space for boats, campers, utility trailers, and recreational vehicles at $50 a month. My family name was printed across the top in green script. Within a week, I had 14 vehicles sitting behind my walnut grove, including a base boat with no cover, a camper leaning on one flat tire, 2 jet skis, a horse trailer that smelled like regret, and a riding mower leaking oil beside Rebecca's wildflowers. Sophie counted each new arrival from the porch and entered the license plate in a spiral notebook. "This one has expired tags," she said one evening. "Do we charge extra for that?" "Tempting," I said, "but let's remain respectable." I upgraded the signs, added a professionally printed rate schedule, and installed 2 plate reading cameras at the entrance. Every vehicle crossing the line was logged by date, time, and duration. I also formed Mercer Land Stewardship LLC and obtained a county permit required for outdoor commercial storage, not because I wanted to operate a storage yard, but because Vivian had already created one and I intended to invoice its operator. Arthur called it turning her fiction into an enforceable accounting problem. Vivian called it harassment. At the hardware store one Saturday, she cornered me near the fencing supplies. "My attorney says adverse possession has already begun," she said. "5 years, Grant, and the corridor belongs to Cedar Hollow. You have been there 7 weeks. The county supports us. Your husband is not the county." Her smile thinned. "He is close enough." I watched her push her cart away, then stood among rolls of welded wire and breathed slowly through my nose. The truth was, she had none of the legal elements she believed she had. Her use was disputed, documented, invoiced, and challenged from the first day. But correcting Vivian would only have made her more careful, and by then I had learned that carelessness was the only honest thing about her. That night, after Sophie went to bed, I sat at my father's oak drafting table and pulled every recorded document connected to the old Schaefer Ranch, the land Cedar Hollow had been built on. I spread out plats from 1939, 1966, 1984, and 2015, aligning monuments and tracing bearings beneath the green glow of my desk lamp. Around 2 in the morning, I noticed a deed reference written in faded pencil along the margin of the oldest survey. It pointed to a separate conveyance recorded in 1941. I drove to the county archive when it opened and asked the clerk, Maribel Santos, to retrieve the original volume. She returned carrying a cracked leather book that smelled like dust and rain. The deed conveyed 16 acres to my grandfather, but attached to it was something the modern title company had missed: a 50-foot strip of land in fee simple running along the northern boundary of the former Schaefer Ranch. I traced the description twice, then compared it to the Cedar Hollow plat. That strip was now the subdivision's only entrance road, not an easement over my land, not a shared access agreement, but land my family owned outright. The title company had searched back 50 years when the subdivision was developed. The deed was 74 years old. They had simply stopped too soon. Maribel watched my face change. "You found something?" she asked. I found their front door. There was more. The so-called maintenance easement Vivian relied on had been recorded against the wrong parcel number, 1 digit missing from the legal description, which meant it referred to land that did not legally exist. A ghost document, impressive from a distance and useless up close. I called Arthur from the courthouse steps. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Let me understand this clearly. The HOA is trespassing on your eastern boundary, renting your land to its residents, and every homeowner enters the subdivision over a road you own." "That is correct." Arthur laughed, low and slow. "Grant, do not threaten anybody. Do not post anything online. Do not speak to Vivian without a witness. Give me 72 hours. Over the next 3 days, we moved quietly. I recorded a conservation covenant over 40 acres surrounding the grove, creating a permanent third-party interest that blocked future development claims. I filed a title insurance notice regarding the defective easement. The title company's general counsel reviewed the old documents and, within a day, agreed in writing that Cedar Hollow had no valid right to the storage strip. Then Arthur filed a quiet title action, a timber destruction claim, a trespass suit, and an accounting demand for every dollar the HOA had collected under the name Mercer Field Annex. The storage charges alone had climbed past $58,000. 2 days later, Maribel called me from the records office. Her voice was tight. "Vivian Crowley came in this morning. She asked whether an old deed volume could be temporarily unavailable during litigation." "What did you say?" I told her no. Maribel paused. Then she slid $500 across my counter. I closed my eyes. "Did you document it?" My supervisor witnessed it, and the camera above the desk recorded everything. By evening, the county attorney had the footage. By morning, Nolan Crowley's office was calling department heads, trying to learn who had seen it. That was when I realized Vivian was no longer fighting for a strip of land. She was fighting to keep the first lie from exposing all the others. And people in that position rarely retreat. They reach for something personal. 3 days later, a child welfare investigator knocked on my front door and asked to speak with Sophie. The investigator introduced herself as Miss Dana Ruiz, and the apology was already sitting behind her eyes before she said a word. She had received an anonymous report claiming Sophie was living with an unstable father who had become violent and obsessive over a property dispute. I invited her inside, offered her coffee, and asked whether I could record the visit. She said yes. Sophie answered every question at the kitchen table while I waited in the den. close enough to hear her voice but not the words. 20 minutes later, Miss Ruiz closed her folder and walked toward the door. Mr. Instrafleck. Mercer, I am recommending this complaint be closed as unfounded. She lowered her voice. Your daughter is safe, thoughtful, and clearly very loved. Whoever made this call was not concerned about her. I thanked her, waited until her car disappeared beyond the gate, then leaned against the refrigerator and finally let myself shake. Sophie wrapped both arms around my waist. Was it Vivian? She asked. I do not know yet. You think it was? Yes. The proof came 2 days later when Luke, the young chainsaw operator, showed up in an old red pickup with a dented tailgate. He stood at my gate, twisting his cap in both hands. Mr. Mercer, I heard Mrs. Crowley make that call. She was in the landscaping office. She said if the county would not scare you, maybe child services would. He looked toward the walnut stumps. She laughed afterward. Luke signed an affidavit at my kitchen table while Sophie poured him lemonade. When he finished, he stared at the floor and said, I should have refused to cut those trees. You should have, I told him, because forgiveness does not require lying. Then I added, but you are refusing her now. And that matters. Arthur amended the complaint again, adding retaliation, malicious reporting, and witness statements. By then, Vivian's board was beginning to crack. She proposed a $600 special assessment for every Cedar Hollow homeowner to defend what she called the community's historic property rights, even though the subdivision was younger than Sophie. 2 board members resigned within 48 hours. Residents started calling me, first cautiously, then angrily, asking whether their dues had funded the trailers, the storage business, or Vivian's attorney. I answered only with documents. No speeches, no gossip, no victory laps. Facts travel farther when you do not chase them. The annual HOA meeting arrived 3 weeks later. It was held in the Cedar Hollow Clubhouse, a tan stone building with decorative shutters that did not cover any windows. Vivian had ordered a live stream because she wanted the community to watch her put me in my place. That decision became one of the few favors she ever did for me. I entered at 7 o'clock with Arthur beside me in navy suspenders, Maribel carrying certified deed copies, Luke holding his affidavit, and Deputy Marshal Wade Harmon in uniform. Wade and I had known each other for years, and the county attorney had asked him to attend because the attempted bribery investigation had expanded to include official interference from Nolan's office. The room went quiet when the badge came through the door. Vivian stood behind the board table in a white jacket, smiling too quickly. This is a private association meeting, she said. Arthur handed her a copy of her own bylaws. Adjacent landowners affected by association business may attend and speak. Article 7, subsection 4. Your board adopted it. She sat down without reading it. I walked to the front, connected my laptop to the projector, and looked at 150 people who had been told I was trying to steal their neighborhood. My name is Grant Mercer, I said. Tonight I am going to show you where your property ends, where mine begins, and what your board has done with the difference. The first image was the 1941 deed. I traced a 50-foot strip with a red line. This land was conveyed to my grandfather in fee simple. It later became the only entrance road into Cedar Hollow. The developer's title search missed it because they stopped 24 years too soon. A murmur rolled through the room. The second slide showed the maintenance easement Vivian had relied on, with the missing parcel digit enlarged on the screen. This document does not describe my property. In fact, it does not describe any legally existing parcel. The title insurer has already acknowledged that Cedar Hollow has no valid storage or maintenance rights on my eastern boundary. The third slide showed the trailers, boats, campers, plate logs, invoices, and the HOA newsletter advertising Mercer Field Annex. The fourth showed the stumps and Dr. Pike's appraisal. Sophie's photograph of the fallen walnut tree filled the entire wall. Nobody laughed. As of 6 o'clock tonight, I continued, the HOA owes $189,000 in storage charges, $84,000 in enhanced tree damages, $27,000 in legal and restoration costs, and every dollar collected from residents for unauthorized storage. The current settlement demand is $306,000. Vivian jumped to her feet. That invoice is fictional. Arthur did not even look at her. The court can decide that. I clicked the final slide. It showed a steel gate and a recorded notice. At noon tomorrow, access across my private road will be suspended unless the HOA signs a settlement and a written license agreement. The room erupted. Homeowners shouted at Vivian. at the board, at each other. Nolan Crowley stood from the front row and pointed at me. You cannot hold an entire neighborhood hostage. Deputy Harmon moved beside him. Commissioner Crowley, we need to speak outside regarding your communications with county staff. Nolan's face emptied. Vivian grabbed his arm, but he pulled away and followed the deputy to the center aisle while the live stream camera caught every step. That was the moment her smile finally disappeared. The HOA settled 9 days later. Their insurer paid $306,000. The association surrendered every claim to my land, and the homeowners approved a permanent road license at $10 per household each month. I set the amount low because I never wanted their money. I wanted a boundary that could not pretend to misunderstand. Vivian was removed as president by a vote of 103-9. Nolan resigned before the county ethics hearing and later pleaded to a reduced charge involving misuse of office. Vivian sold their house the following spring. The last time I saw her, she was loading boxes into a rental truck while rain darkened the pavement. She looked at me once, but neither of us spoke. Sophie and I planted 24 walnut saplings where the old trees had stood. She named the strongest one Rebecca. We used part of the settlement for Sophie's college fund, and the rest to create a scholarship for students entering surveying, forestry, and land stewardship. Luke became the first recipient. He now works summers on my crew, and I trust him with a boundary rod, which is more trust than I give most grown men. Sometimes justice does not look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like a young tree, a corrected deed, and a gate that opens only after somebody finally learns to ask permission. But I still wonder whether closing the road was fair to the homeowners who never knew what Vivian was doing. Was I protecting my family? Or did I go too far by putting an entire community under pressure? Tell me what you would have done. And if you have ever watched an HOA mistake authority for ownership, share your story in the comments, because the next person reading it may need to know they are not powerless.